The Overwatch series has massive potential, and it should be one of the biggest video game universes on the planet. But right now, the franchise is massively underutilized. With the disastrous launch of Overwatch 2, the cancellation of single-player content, and new competition from Marvel rivals, what would it actually take to make Overwatch huge and the next cultural icon? I put a lot of time and energy into thinking about this, and today, I'm breaking down my opinion on how exactly Blizzard and Microsoft could pull it off. From single-player, multiplayer, to spin-offs that can make Overwatch explode in popularity. This will be a fun video, and I'm extremely excited to talk about it, and while it's just my opinion at the end of the day, it's worth exploring what could happen if Blizzard went all in. But here's the thing, if Overwatch actually wants to stand alongside massive franchises, a lot would have to change, and it's really not clear that today's Blizzard and Microsoft could pull off some of the things that I'm suggesting in practice. So here's how I want to break things down. First, the essential steps that I think Blizzard, and by extension Microsoft, would have to do to make this happen. From there, we'll talk about three core pillars: single-player content, multiplayer, and finally, the wider media universe. And with all that being said, let's get started. So, like I was saying, in my opinion, Overwatch has massive potential. And when I say massive potential, I mean everything. From single-player games to the multiplayer, to things beyond that, like movies, books, toys, spin-offs. I mean, when you think about how much money is possibly in Overwatch, it's enormous, and I think it has so much potential, especially compared to other video game franchises. And like I said earlier, it's very underutilized, but I think that there's a couple of things that give Overwatch this serious advantage over a lot of franchises, and it gives it a lot of possibilities to unlocking its full potential. And so the first thing is, I think that Overwatch has a great foundation of characters and gameplay that people love. And this kind of all started with the original Overwatch, and I think that a lot of people love Overwatch as a game, and they also like the characters, and those characters open up so many different dynamics that could really be expanded into so much more. And I think that a lot of that awesome Overwatch universe and some of these original characters kind of stem from this earlier form of Blizzard, where you had Project Titan that was kind of trying to be an MMORPG at some point, and then it kind of morphed into Overwatch. And so this great foundation of characters and world building are a huge advantage. But beyond that is the art style, and I think that lends itself to massive popularity outside of the games. And the thing is too, with this art style, you can do so much. It's very approachable to all audiences. It's approachable to younger audiences. It's approachable to older audiences. And then with this art style, you can do so much. I think it's a little bit more adaptable to things like TV shows, to movies, to other video games. I think it's a little bit easier to develop games around this rather than these hyper-realistic graphics. And the other thing too, which I know a lot of people are going to get mad at me for, is that I think that that art style lends itself to more microtransactions. It lends itself to more cosmetics. And you see this with something like Fortnite, where I think a lot of these hyper-realistic games have trouble getting to that like Fortnite level because of its art style. And so Overwatch kind of has a similar art style, and that would feed into its multiplayer and things like that. I don't like cosmetic microtransactions either, but I'm just kind of speaking about this from the business perspective of things. But this art style, I think, lends itself to so many different areas in terms of other media, in terms of ease of use with creating video games and stuff like that. The other thing too is that there's just a huge variety of options on video game ideas from all the different characters. And we're going to talk about that later. We're actually going to talk about every single character. It's going to be really fun and awesome. So stay tuned for that. But there's just a huge variety of video game ideas. I mean, these ideas just write themselves nearly. And also, I think the world is very conducive to achieving these objectives. I mean, there's been a very solid foundation set for Overwatch, and you can really go in many different directions. And you can go in different directions for different gameplay ideas, for different world building, different media, which is huge in terms of just overall making awesome products, and then overall profitability for the company. And I think too, there's also this competitive multiplayer element with Overwatch, which is a huge advantage. So you could take the Overwatch multiplayer in many different areas. The fact that Overwatch has this multiplayer component lends itself to having longevity. It lends itself to having live service or multiplayer element that will last a long time, that is supported by other games. And when you add a competitive element to things, that can add more longevity and it can add more popularity to things too. So not all game series lend themselves to this multiplayer aspect, but in terms of just overall growth and hugeness, I think that having a multiplayer element is huge, and Overwatch already has that by extension. Now, with all these advantages though, there's a lot of things you have to do. And I wanted to talk about the single player, the multiplayer, and all those things, but I think before we get to that point, we have to kind of establish a couple of core ideas that I think if you're going to take Overwatch to the next level, you would have to keep in mind. And this is just my opinion, but I think that it comes down to two core ideas, and then from these core ideas comes these other aspects that you have to consider. So here's like two core ideas. So the first thing is I think there needs to be this decision to believe in and utilize the Overwatch brand. I think this is so essential because you have so many video game franchises out there that are kind of just collecting dust. I don't think that they're really being utilized to their full potential. And some video game series, they had their time and place, they had their time of popularity, and now maybe it's not as culturally relevant. And I think some game series are not utilized very properly. And so you have to kind of make this decision of, do you believe in the Overwatch brand? I mean, do you believe that Overwatch can be massively popular? Do you believe that it can make you a ton of money? And do you believe that there's amazing ideas there? And I think the answer to that is obviously yes. But to even begin this process, you have to believe in the brand. You have to utilize it. And there's just so many video game franchises that have this problem. I mean, it's like Halo has this problem as well, where do you believe in the Halo franchise? Because, there's so much potential with Halo and you need to believe in it and you have to give it the resources it needs to be successful. And so I think that's the first thing, right? It seems simple and obvious, but it's a critical decision. You have to believe in and utilize the Overwatch brand. And then the second thing is that I think you have to have a commitment to achieving success in the long term. And the thing is, this is going to take some time. I mean, I think to make Overwatch into something really massive, this is not a one game situation. I think this is a multi-year process. This is a process that would probably take many different games in a very long amount of time and a lot of energy and effort. I mean, I think that you can strike gold with a game series and things can get huge, but it's probably not the most likely outcome. But I think that with time, a commitment to achieving success in the long term would be very beneficial for Overwatch. And it's really how you can make this series just massive in the end of the day. So this commitment to achieving success in the long term requires you to think long term. I mean, when you look at Overwatch 2, I think in so many different ways, the game felt very rushed. I mean, you kind of released with 3 new heroes, couple maps, and a switch from 6v6 to 5v5. And I don't think that that was well received by a lot of players. And so to me, that was not a commitment to long term. I think that was more of short termism. And so I think that with Overwatch, you have to have this commitment to achieving success in the long term. You need to build that brand, that reputation, and build all these elements to achieve success in the long term. And so beyond these two core ideas, I think there's a couple of other things that you actually have to do. And I think the first thing is you really need to establish this really clear vision on Overwatch in terms of what its story is, what the brand is, and what the overarching goal of the games and products are, and what they'll achieve. I mean, I think this is very clear because I think with a lot of video game series, they lose their identity in some ways, or their identity morphs and it's not very clear. And so when you change your identity and you change your goals and objectives, things can get out of hand very quickly. And so I think that it's very clear to kind of establish, what is Overwatch? What do you want Overwatch to be in terms of storytelling? Is it something that's a little bit more gritty? Is it just super friendly? There's no edge to it. I think that Overwatch isn't the most hyper edge game ever, but I think that at the same time too, you want to have a little bit of grittiness to it. You want to have some room to maneuver for storytelling and to create compelling stories. And I think you want to write down whatever that vision is for Overwatch in terms of its storytelling and what its brand is and what the overarching goals of its games and products are, and stick to that when you make new video games, when you make new books and media, because I think a lot of times you see this changing identity and that identity ultimately kind of leads to quality deterioration in a lot of ways. So that's the first thing. And then beyond that, you have to hire the right people for the job to lead this element. I mean, I think it's very, very, very essential that you have someone that's leading the Overwatch franchise that really understands what it is. I mean, they really understand this vision. And even if they move on, they have people that basically have those codified rules, those codified ideas behind Overwatch, and they stick to them. They stick to them tried and true. And it's very critical that you have these people leading the overarching vision for the game, whether it's a multiplayer game or a single player game or whatever it is. I think that you can get into this problem where you basically manage and lead things by committee, and there's too many cooks in the kitchen. And so your identity is kind of just all over the place. You have these gameplay elements over here, you have storytelling that's changing over here, and things get out of hand really quickly. And so I think when you look at a lot of great video games, they had these very powerful visions. They had these powerful ideas and leaders, and they stuck to them. And I think that when you have this core leadership, you kind of go down to the more specific elements for the game, like the artistic leads or the gameplay leads, and they are basically kind of taking these rules and ideas from this overarching vision. So they have the idea of what they want to achieve, and then they use their expertise in art or whatever it is, gameplay design, stuff like that, to kind of fit that objective. It's not like people are doing their own little thing over here and over there. I think you have to have this really strong vision, and that vision is translated to the people that are going to make the physical games, whether it's the art assets and stuff like that, because obviously they're going to have more expertise than the person at the very top with art or programming or whatever it is. So I think that's very, very critical. But beyond the leadership and the vision for Overwatch, I think another thing too is that the company really has to invest the financial resources and trust and belief in the product creation. And so I'll just basically talk about Blizzard for now. I mean, basically because of Microsoft's ownership of Blizzard, let's just say Blizzard for now for ease of use. But basically, I think you have to invest in the franchise. I mean, to make Overwatch the next big thing, you have to commit to it. You have to trust in the developers and in the product and in the brand. You have to believe in that product and you have to believe in it in the long term, because I just don't know if one game turns things around. I think you need a lot of different things to kind of make things happen and build from there. And the first thing is starts with investing in financial resources. And because video games are artistic at their very core, there's a level of risk to that. And so you have to trust your developers. You have to trust your visionaries. You have to trust the programmers, the artists to kind of make that vision happen. But that's why I said beforehand, you have to have a very clear vision on what you want Overwatch to be. What is its story? And the right people to lead the job, whether it's the core visionary behind the overarching franchise or the specific game. I mean, you want people that are very passionate about it, but you have to invest in them and you have to invest in those financial resources. So I think that's very core and key to things. And the thing too is that in tandem with that, I think you need to build a solid foundation and reduce the technical debt that you might have. So I think that a lot of games, they might try to basically keep going and tack on the same engine. They have all these bugs and problems or creative processes that get in the way. And I think that if you really want to invest in Overwatch, you kind of have to invest in a solid foundation. You have to invest in a foundation where you're reducing technical debt from your programming perspective or your artistic elements, or revamp your process to kind of make things very effective. And I think the other thing too is that you really want to build the reputation of the brand. I mean, I think that Overwatch 2, in a lot of ways, it lost a lot of trust with people. And the key thing is building that reputation of the brand. It's not all about earning financial returns in the short term. I mean, of course you want to do that with every product you put out there, but I think that you want to build the reputation of the brand, because if you build reputation with the customers and your player base, that will give you loyalty, which will then translate into, I think, profits in the long term. And so I think that that's really key in this overarching strategy with single player games and all these other things, which I'll talk about more in depth. And I think the last thing too is that you really need to reduce the time of development as much as possible, because I'm going to be talking about the single player elements that I think would be really awesome for Overwatch to achieve. But with such long development times for games, I think you really need to find a way to speed things up. I just don't know if the average single player game should take 7 years to make or 5 years to make. I think you really need to lower the time it takes to make some of these games, because if you have 10 years between sequels, I mean, it's just very hard to maintain cultural relevancy. I mean, people's lives change. You know, people have kids, people grow up, they go to college, they enter new life circumstances. And so when you have a game that the last game in the series was 10 years ago, a lot of people change. And the younger people might not necessarily also connect with that game series, which is why you need to consistently put out content that makes your brand culturally relevant across age groups, across different just gamers in general. And I think that you need to reduce the time of development for a lot of your games, whether it's single player games, especially so, but also the multiplayer aspects and things like that. Now, that's quite a challenge in of itself, but I really just don't think that the times that you see in terms of developing games right now should be as long as they are. I think there needs to be process changes and things like that to kind of try to keep the brand culturally relevant and consistently there. I mean, the last Elder Scrolls game came out in 2011. I don't think you want to fit into that section. I think that gets you into a territory which is really challenging and not easy to overcome. And so I think that when you improve your process for developing games, or you reduce the scope or do things like that, it'll help a lot in the end of the day. And so just with these core ideas established, because I think that having these ideas in mind as you go throughout the single player and the multiplayer and all these other elements, from there you have this foundation with which to build these things that are going to help build the Overwatch brand theoretically. So in my opinion, there's a couple of ways to achieve this revitalization of Overwatch. And I think it comes down to single player, multiplayer, and other elements. But let's talk about single player, because I think single player is one of these strategies where you can really build the reputation of the game series. You can validate your strategy, you can earn returns, but you can also improve in your game development process and then feed into the multiplayer aspect. I mean, when you look at Overwatch 2, so many people were very excited for the possibility of the single player Overwatch experience. And they had these missions eventually released that really were kind of just not that great. And then of course they canceled the single player right after that. And I've always found it just so surprising that there has been this lack of focus on the single player aspects. And it goes back to the things that I was saying earlier. I mean, you have to invest in the brand. You have to have trust. You have to have a clear vision. You have to reduce technical debt. And I think that the best way to approach the single player aspect is not necessarily to try to take the multiplayer, the engine, and then have this limited toolkit to then build single player games. I think that what you want to do is have single player games, and then those single player games build interest in Overwatch, and then that funnels into the multiplayer aspect. And so that goes back to what I was saying earlier, where you want to build a solid foundation. Like, so if you're going to make Overwatch single player games, maybe you make a game engine or you build a foundation for other games where you do a lot of the work up front. And then from there, you can utilize this foundation to build games in different genres or different games for different characters. That's going to ultimately make it a lot easier to build and create games. And so I think that this is very important. There's so many options. I mean, there's so many amazing possibilities with single player games for the Overwatch series from all the core characters. But once again, these games, I think, ultimately do a couple of things. They build reputation for the company, right? So if you get goodwill with the customer, that's great, right? You build the brand of Overwatch. You can also earn returns. Of course, everyone wants to earn a return when they make a video game. And I'm not saying these games operate at a loss. I think that obviously you want to make money, but ultimately they're there to build reputation. And they also provide a funnel into the multiplayer elements and possibly other multimedia elements in the future. I think that's a good way to think about it. So like if you make an awesome single player Overwatch game, people might want to go and try out the multiplayer game, which then that has expansion from there. Or if you have different types of single player games that appeal to different audiences, that attracts more people into the multiplayer aspect of Overwatch. And so I think that when you think about making these games, I think you really want to start with the most popular Overwatch characters, or maybe the original cast, because I think that that's probably where Blizzard's character design was probably the best, at least in my opinion. I think the original cast has a lot of characters that people are familiar with, even if it's just visually. And I think that there's a lot of options with some of these characters. And so I'm going to go over a couple of these characters that I think would make great ideas. But I want to talk about all the characters, even if it's just very briefly, because I think it's a fun thing. And so when you think about where would you start with a single player game in Overwatch, I think the way to approach it is not to think about it as a huge Overwatch game that has 30 characters, or you try to fit in a campaign mission where you choose your Overwatch character. I think that's the wrong approach in my opinion. I think you want to build games around characters. And this does a lot of things. So one, you create an awesome game. And if the game does well, that can lead to sequels, or it could even lead to its own huge multiplayer thing that becomes its huge thing in of itself. And you don't even need the main Overwatch multiplayer as much anymore. So here's a great one, Genji as a character. Okay, so people love Genji, but Genji as a character, I mean, that is a fun gameplay style. And when I think about Genji, I think of something like Dishonored. So if you've ever played Dishonored, imagine a game that takes elements from Dishonored, but then you apply a Genji game. And the thing is, you don't restrict Genji's kit to the abilities that he has in the multiplayer. I mean, you want to give him 20 abilities. You want to have kind of an upgrade system where he upgrades his sword or he upgrades his abilities. And you could have this fast-paced Overwatch style game where you're parkouring and it's just a quick, tight, single-player gameplay experience with 8 to 10 hours. Maybe you even throw Hanzo in there as kind of an Easter egg, and then you could have a second game and a third game. And what you're doing is you're expanding the lore around Genji. You're exploring the lore of this certain section of Overwatch, and you're building this really fun gameplay that almost writes itself. You take the core idea of Genji and you make an awesome game around it. Maybe there's a section where you upgrade his sword and you can have customization to his toolkit that then you progress throughout the entire game. I think this is an awesome idea. I mean, the game idea writes itself. Okay, and a second character, which I know a lot of people are not gonna like, but I like this character, it's Widowmaker. So Widowmaker is an awesome character for a single player experience. I mean, what you do is a game that maybe is a little bit more stealth oriented. So imagine a game that's like Dishonored. Let's say you had this city area and it almost kind of played like Assassin's Creed, where you had all these targets that you had to go after as Widowmaker, and you had maybe the secret base. You could customize your sniper rifle, you could customize your toolkit, and there was different ways to approach this kind of element to things. And not all these games have to have the same tonality to them. They don't have to have the same energy to them. Some of the characters lend themselves to a little bit darker, more grittier environment. I don't think it's great to just kind of stick to these one aspects of things where you just stick to one kind of aesthetic. I mean, I think that with a Widowmaker game, you could be a little bit more mature. I mean, I think you want to fit into this kind of femme fatale idea of Widowmaker. You could have a situation where she has a rival, and then this rival is adding to the lore of the characters. Maybe she becomes this future multiplayer character, you have someone that works with her. And so you build this great character development. And like I said, you could have these situations where you upgrade your grappling hook, your sniper rifle, and you could approach these missions in different ways. Think of Assassin's Creed. There's some person in a castle and you have to take them out, and there's different ways to approach it. And you have this kind of open world city and you have to figure out how you're going to progress and move through it. And it doesn't have to be this 90-hour gameplay experience, but you can easily see a situation where you can tell a very compelling story. You could tell a story that's a little bit darker and grittier. You have these cool gameplay elements where you take something like Dishonored and you take kind of a more stealth game and you expand her toolkit, right? Have a game where you can go prone. I know that you don't prone in Overwatch, but why not have Widowmaker be a little bit more stealthier? Expand the abilities with the sniper rifle, expand the mobility of the character, and really just play with this. And I think when you make these games, you want to have a lead that understands these characters. You want to have someone that is passionate about it. I mean, you want a Genji fanatic making this game. You want someone that loves this character, they love their identity, they love their story, and they really understand it, and they really go after that in terms of making a compelling story, in terms of making compelling gameplay, and something that's just a ton of fun. And like I said, you want to make a profit, but you ultimately want to make something that's fun and awesome. And ultimately, what are these doing? Like I said, they're building reputation of Overwatch. So like if you make an awesome Widowmaker game, and that does really well, you can make a second Widowmaker game, right? Or a second Genji game. And then people that play that are like, this is awesome. I love this character. She's this awesome sniper femme fatale character. And then now I want to check out the multiplayer. And so it feeds into this. I mean, and there's so many of the characters lend themselves to so many different ideas. I mean, when you think about Reaper, for example, I'm thinking of something like Doom 2016, right? Have this game where it's really dark and grittier. It's a lot grittier than some of the other characters, and do your own take on a Doom-like game. You know, have upgrades for your weapons, have some interesting mobility to things. Look at Lucio, okay? Lucio, so here's my idea with Lucio. What if you make your own Jet Set Radio Future game? I don't know if anyone knows that game, but it's an awesome kind of cult classic on the original Xbox. And you do your own kind of game where you play this kind of Jet Set Radio Future, this kind of almost more sports fanatic game. And maybe there's a multiplayer element to it. And then possibly this Lucio game gets really big in of itself. And you have this huge other series that's doing work for you as part of the broader Overwatch series that's not even connected to the multiplayer. It's just a single player game that had its own possibility. I mean, with Lucio, imagine you have this Jet Set Radio Future game. I mean, maybe it's not as huge as an FPS game, but it's something different to work on. It's something that could be exciting and different than, say, this classical first-person shooter or a Dishonored game that maybe lends itself better to something like Genji or Widowmaker. Then you have characters like Cassidy or Ash or something like that, where essentially it's kind of more, let's say, of a cowboy Western game. And this could be something more like Team Fortress 2. That is something that could be really awesome and entertaining. Maybe you tell this very interesting story around that and you expand the lore behind these characters. And when you do this, you're not just making a great video game. This possibly expands you into possibilities of making books and to maybe lending itself to a TV series. And once again, flowing into the multiplayer aspect of things. Like I said, these ideas literally write themselves. I mean, you don't have to do the ideas that I suggested for Widowmaker or Lucio, but some of these ideas, like I said, I'm just thinking about them off the top of my head. And so they give you this reputation, they give you possibilities of huge gains in terms of just their own game series that could open up all these sequels, and then they flow into the multiplayer in of itself. And so beyond this, I wanted to talk about each of the characters just a little bit in terms of ideas that I have for them. And not all of them I'm going to really have super fleshed out ideas. I really haven't looked at them too much, but I wanted to demonstrate how much potential each of these characters have for their own single player gameplay experiences. And so let's go through them one by one. And so I'm going to go through all the characters, and I apologize if I don't know some of the newer characters because I haven't played Overwatch in a little while, but I'll try my best with all the characters. Like I said, some of the characters I think lend themselves better to the Overwatch experience than others. But let's start out with the DPS characters first. So Ash, right? And I think Ash and Cassidy kind of could almost have their own game together. I don't think you have to have each character have their own game, but you could combine characters into different games. So with this, I'm thinking like a multiplayer game like Team Fortress 2, a single player story that features Cassidy or Ash in these kind of early days in the lore of the Overwatch games. And there's maybe a compelling story there. And you could do something fun with that. With Bastion, I mean, Bastion is cool because you could basically take Bastion and upgrade Bastion in many different ways with different combat abilities, different weapons. And with this one, I have less of an idea, but I think that just some sort of like first-person shooter, some sort of like play on using Bastion's toolkit would be awesome. So Echo's a tough one, I think. I mean, I'm not really quite sure how I would do Echo, to be honest with you. It's a character with, I think, a little bit more of an interesting toolkit. And I think you could do something compelling there from a story perspective in gameplay, but it's not the easiest. And so, like I said, if thinking about trying to build single player games around Overwatch, some characters are going to be easier to do than others. And so I think it's just going to be tricky. Freya, I don't really know this character. It was released somewhat recently, so haven't played that character, so I couldn't tell you. We talked about Genji earlier. I mean, a Dishonored style game, an amazing toolkit. You could tell a great story, and you could even throw Hanzo in there, like have like a Metal Gear Solid 2 kind of situation where you're playing as Hanzo. You know, the ideas write themselves. With Junkrat, I'm almost thinking of like a Mad Max situation. You could have Junker Queen in here, Junkrat, maybe even Roadhog, where you kind of have this Mad Max style of game where there's just a huge focus on destruction, on building crazy cars, or living in this kind of wasteland area. And you could just have so many different expansion opportunities with Junkrat in terms of this explosives toolkit and stuff like that. With Mei, I almost think that you could actually go somewhere completely different with this. What if you play a platformer with her ice abilities, right? You could have interesting and unique platforming elements with basically creating platforms with her ice weapon or avoiding abilities with her ice block and then expanding that toolkit. And like I said, it doesn't have to be a first person game. I think that Mei actually adds a lot of different ideas and dynamics for a platformer. Do you have to follow that? Not necessarily, but it's a really cool idea. Pharah, I think, has a similar problem as Echo in terms of single player games. I think there's some cool ideas that you could do with this. Maybe it's a first person shooter or something like that, but I think it's a little bit trickier. Reaper, I think that a good example of this is like the Doom 2016. The Doom 2016 games have something really brutal and just, you know, you go in there, you can customize your weapons and you kind of try to imitate something like that. So Sojourn and Soldier 76, I almost kind of group together. They're really tricky because their identity is the core classic FPS game. And so it's like, how do you do something different there? I mean, I think the best way to do that is you play some sort of classical FPS game and you do your own take on it. So maybe it's a Counter-Strike like game or something like that. But I think that you want to probably just lean into that FPS style of things, but you need to do something different because it's just, they represent that classical FPS experience. And I think it's tricky. Those are tricky games to pull off, but I think you could do it, but you would probably have to think about it a little bit. So with Sombra, I mean, I almost think that like a really cool experience would be to do something like Watch Dogs. I mean, and not in like an open world capacity or like in this huge Grand Theft Auto Watch Dogs like experience, but maybe, like I said, I know I always go back to this game, but go to something like Dishonored, where you have Sombra in this more tight open world and it's a little bit grittier of a story. You could have some customization abilities with her hacking abilities or her weapons, and you could introduce new characters that fill out the lore of the universe. I think it's really cool. Symmetra is another one that I think would be kind of a more experimental game. I mean, I think you could do a lot of interesting things with her science abilities and stuff like that to create a very unique gameplay experience. Maybe it's a more story-driven game, but I think it's really tricky. But another character that's a little bit harder to pull off. So Torbjorn, tower defense, right? I mean, think about this. You have the turrets. You could do an amazing, interesting take on tower defense, which could be really awesome. I mean, there's so many cool things you could do. You could just go really experiment with that and go wild with it. And like I said, this doesn't have to be this multi-billion-dollar game. It could be a fun tower defense game that once again supports Overwatch. Okay, so Tracer has amazing gameplay mechanic ideas just because of her toolkit. I mean, in terms of the teleportation, in terms of the speed, I think that she lends herself really well to a good single player gameplay experience. I think the problem with Tracer is her personality is tough to pull off, I think that if you're not careful, it might not resonate with a lot of people. And so I think you really need a very strong writer behind creating a compelling Tracer story that it just doesn't go too much into cringe territory. But there's so much awesome gameplay mechanics. The biggest thing I worry about with that is how you handle the character. I think you can do it, but I think it's a little bit tricky. That might be an unpopular opinion, but I think compared to the other characters, she's a little bit harder to pull off. Venture, I stopped playing Overwatch when this character was released, so couldn't tell you. Widowmaker, we talked about this. It's like a Dishonored style game. Have a very stealth game that's kind of like Assassin's Creed, where you go into a city, there's 9 targets, and you're just left out and you're tasked with figuring it out. You have a base, you could customize your weapons, there's side missions, but imagine there's this huge fortress and you have to figure out how you're going to do it. You can approach it with some more close combat abilities. You can go really stealthy, and maybe there's rewards for doing things very stealthily. And I think you could tell a really dark and compelling story with Widowmaker. I mean, that's just great ideas there. So Anna, I think, is also a tough one. You know, with Anna, for some of these characters too that you might struggle with in terms of like a dedicated game, I think what you could do is you could tell like a broader Overwatch team story. So you could have like an Anna and a Winston and a bunch of other people that kind of make kind of a more team-oriented game with like 5 or so characters where they kind of all fit into this broader game rather than having a dedicated game themselves. I mean, you could maybe do something like that, but I think it's a little bit tricky. And it's the same thing with Baptiste. think it's a little bit tough to pull off individual games for some of these characters, but I think it's something that you could do is just try to have a more broader Overwatch game. A game that follows the more broader Overwatch story, drives the overarching narrative forward a lot more than these individual games that kind of go on lore expansion and stuff like that. So with Brigitte, I always think that basically pair her with Reinhardt. And I think you could do a really cool game where maybe they try to recruit other warriors like them, and they have this kind of recruitment game where you have this kind of very kind of just lighthearted but like fun experience where maybe you build up a fortress or something like that. You could then play on different gameplay mechanics with their melee abilities. Alari, I don't know. I haven't played as this character, so I couldn't tell you. And same with Juno, I just don't know. I played Overwatch 2 when kind of was originally coming out, so some of these newer characters I don't know, so I apologize. But if you have a great idea for some of these characters, let me know in the comment section. So Kiriko is really interesting. I think she has an awesome toolkit too that lends herself well to making a game. And I'm almost thinking of like a game like Mirror's Edge in a lot of ways. Have a very mobile kit and maybe do a take on Mirror's Edge, but with some more combat. I mean, it's this very fast-paced game. I mean, if anyone's played Mirror's Edge, it's got this really cool just mobility to it. And I think Kiriko lends herself well to something like that. Lifeweaver, same idea. I don't know about the character, so I can't really give you some great ideas. Lucio, I told you about this. Jet Set Radio Future, your own sports game, something like that. I mean, it's just really cool and fun. I mean, the opportunities are just awesome. And you can just easily see having a ton of fun with this. You could have some awesome music. You could get a composer in there with a really awesome soundtrack. I mean, there's just so much creativity with this character. Mercy is another character that I think it's a little bit trickier to pull off, but she's so popular that I think that she lends herself to her own game. And maybe it's something very unorthodox. It's very different. Maybe it's something more akin to Animal Crossing or Terraria or Stardew Valley or something like that. Maybe it's a game that is more around her mobility. I don't really know exactly, but I think that she's clearly a character you would want to try to focus on. So with Moira is also another tricky one, I think. I mean, like I said, some of these characters are definitely harder than others, but I think that if anyone's played a game kind of like Cult of the Lamb, I think that you could do something where she's kind of building this empire up. You could build up your kind of minions and build up this kind of these dark forces to achieve your objectives. I think that could be a awesome idea. Wu Yang, I don't know. It's a new character. I've not played as them, so I can't really tell you. Zenyatta, I think, is a tricky one too. But I think what you could do with Zenyatta and kind of all the robotic side and that side of things is I think you could tell a compelling story with the robots in the Overwatch universe. And so maybe that includes things like Ramatra, like Zenyatta, where you tell a broader story about a certain section of the Overwatch universe. And that's where Zenyatta or Ramatra or non-human characters could fit into things. I think that could be an interesting and compelling idea. Okay, so then on to the tanks. D.Va, okay. This is like an Armored Core game. Really awesome game where you customize mechs. Maybe there's a cool single player experience and you could have this awesome, fun multiplayer experience. Make it your own take on Armored Core or something like that. I mean, I think it's really awesome. You could introduce new characters into this kind of D.Va mech sub-universe. There's a lot of potential with this. I mean, I think that the Armored Core side of things makes a ton of sense. With Doomfist has a really cool toolkit. Doomfist lends himself well to an awesome action combat game. Maybe it's even like a God of War like game where you have all these cool combos. I mean, I think that like a God of War style game would be awesome for Doomfist. Could even be first person. I'm not sure how to exactly pull it off, but it could be really interesting. Hazard, I don't know the character, so I couldn't tell you. We talked about Junker Queen where you kind of combine that with Junkrat or something like that into this kind of Mad Max style, destruction style game. That could be really cool. Malga, I don't know. Maybe it's something like Doom 2016. I'm not quite sure, to be honest with you. Same with Orisa. I couldn't really think of a great idea. Maybe that is something that you have an idea of in the comments. And then we have Ramatra. So I talked about Ramatra with a kind of broader game, maybe telling about a certain side of the Overwatch universe. But if you wanted to make a dedicated Ramatra game, like I said, something like Cult of the Lamb, where let's say you build your empire up, you recruit more robots or something like that to build this fun gameplay mechanic where you're expanding your empire, you're expanding your soldiers, that could be a ton of fun. And I already mentioned that with Reinhardt and Brigitte. That could be an awesome experience too, where you do something similar, but on the human side of things. We also talked about Roadhog with Junkrat and the destruction side of things. With Sigma too, I think that Sigma has a cool toolkit too. You could really expand that into all these science elements, and you could build this more lighthearted, evil genius single player experience where you kind of go through a campaign and you try to level up and upgrade things. And same with Winston. Winston has an awesome toolkit where you could really kind of go into that kind of science side of him and get all these really awesome abilities. Maybe you even make it a more like a third person game rather than first person, and you could really just expand things up into an amazing thing. And then Wrecking Ball. I mean, with Wrecking Ball, I almost think like you play something like Super Monkey Ball, right? You want like some kind of fun, wacky game where maybe it's this kind of crazy puzzle game where you try to finish the level as quickly as possible, or you try to destroy things. I mean, there's a lot of really cool, wacky ideas with Wrecking Ball, and I think you want to jump into that if you were going to make a game about Wrecking Ball. And Zarya, I think Zarya lends herself better to a broader Overwatch game than a game by itself, but I guess you just have to wait and see about that. And so that's kind of like my rough overview thoughts about all the characters. I mean, as you can see, these ideas write themselves. I mean, they're so amazing. To be honest with you, I think it's just, there's so much potential with the single player games. And like I said, ultimately, what they do is they lead to these massive funnels into the multiplayer game experience. You earn returns for the games themselves, and then they can also spark their own multiplayer experiences. They can also spark their own huge possibilities to become big franchises in of themselves. And of course, if you build popularity with these characters, that encourages media like books, it encourages TV shows, it encourages toys, it encourages all these other things that support the overall Overwatch brand and the multiplayer elements in general. And so now, with the single player out of the way, let's talk about the multiplayer, because this is something that I think is more true to the core essence of Overwatch. And the thing is, I'm not an expert about Overwatch in terms of its multiplayer. I'm okay at the game, I'm not amazing, but it seems like Overwatch 2 made a lot of mistakes. And I think that ultimately, to make Overwatch 2 a healthy game, you need a really healthy player base. You need a lot of people playing the game. And I'm thinking of games like Team Fortress 2 or Counter-Strike or League of Legends or Dota 2, where you have this really large audience of players that are casual players, but then you also have this competitive element of things. And then because the game is ultra popular, it kind of helps the matchmaking. It helps there be enough people to kind of have really good and competitive games, breathes life into the game, and you can have something that's really fun overall. But I also think that you want to have things that support this. And that's why I suggested a lot of these single player games, because I think that the single player games in of themselves build the Overwatch brand, but they also funnel people into the multiplayer experience, I would believe. So that could be something that is really huge, and that gives you a healthy player base into the multiplayer aspect of things, which could also be very profitable for the company. But I think that beyond that, like I said, beyond the core competitive dynamic, you want to have this huge casual audience that by extension supports the competitive dynamic, which helps matchmaking, which helps breathe life into the game, to help bring new content into the game, to keep that multiplayer experience there, because that multiplayer experience there has this longer tail than a single player game where people play it and then they're done with it. It keeps people constantly invested in the series, and of course is a source of revenue for the company as well. Now, the thing about it too is that I think that one way to kind of build the Overwatch experience is you want to have, I think, a very massive progression and fun system that supports the essence of being a noob, I guess, in the sense that not everyone is going to get to this max rank in competitive Overwatch, or they might not even play the competitive dynamic in Overwatch. Not everyone is going to get to those top ranks, and that's okay, but I think that you want to have people stay on the multiplayer experience. It's not just about buying microtransactions, in my opinion. It's also about progression. It's about having pure fun with things. And I think that one way to do this is have this huge progression system, and have a progression system that is not just greedy. It's not just there to try to convince you to buy skips in a battle pass or something like that. I think you want to have this really cool and awesome and very long progression system for free-to-play players. And I think that Overwatch probably needs to be free-to-play to build this really huge multiplayer audience, which means you're going to have probably like things like battle passes and microtransactions, but you want a really compelling system that keeps people there. And then once again, because they're invested in the game, then they transition into microtransactions or battle passes or things like that. And so I'm imagining like this huge progression system for each of the characters, where you have fun challenges to have with each of these characters, and then these unlock certain progressions for some of these characters. And I know that these challenges and things like that exist today, but I think you want to go even more than what you're doing now. You want to have this progression system that lasts dozens, if not hundreds of hours for each of these characters. And it keeps people engaged with the game, and it keeps people feel like they're getting massive value for a free-to-play game. And because they're getting massive value, they're going to be incentivized, I think, to also expand into the battle pass or other dynamics. And there's so many cool things you could do beyond just these challenges and stuff. I mean, you could have an Overwatch HQ where each of the characters in the game has their own room, and you could customize their room, right? You could have these different aesthetics and cosmetics for each of the Overwatch characters' rooms. Or you could have a different base for each of the characters where you could walk around it and you could design it and customize it. You could have cosmetics, obviously. You could have different level styles. I mean, I think you really want to just go into this progression system, but not make it so greedy. You want to have free-to-play elements that keep people wanting to do things like designing their Overwatch base, or these progression challenges for them to get better at a Junkrat, to get better at a Genji, because it keeps them engaged in the game. It keeps them playing the game, which then supports the competitive algorithm. It keeps games balanced. And the thing is, beyond this progression system and kind of this appeal to casual audience, you go into the competitive dynamic of things. And I'm not a competitive expert, but I do feel like 6v6 is a little bit better of a format than 5v5. I've heard what a lot of people have said about this, and it really just seems like that is a better competitive dynamic than the 5v5 dynamic. Like I said, I'm not a pro at this game, but from what I've read from a lot of people and watched from a lot of people, this seems to be the case. But here's the thing. What I think you need to do with the multiplayer aspect is a couple of core ideas. I think that what you really need to do is you need to have someone in charge of the game, or a group of people really in charge of the game that really understand competitive dynamics. You really need someone that is passionate about multiplayer. You need someone that's passionate about Overwatch multiplayer. You need someone that really understands competitive dynamics in video games, and in particular FPS games. You need to understand that. You need to live and breathe this. And I think that by extension, you probably want to have a committee of about like 1,000 people that really know what's going on and really try to use them to make an amazing video game experience. And I know like a lot of people might disagree with me on this in terms of appealing to streamers or some of these pros, and they might not make the game fun or it's against the casual audience, but I think these people really understand the game. And there's a lot of advantages of listening to these people that really live and breathe the multiplayer experience. Because I'm going to suggest a couple of points that I think are very critical, and I understand that they're very hard to pull off, if not impossible, but I think that they're things to just keep in mind. So the first thing is the game needs to be as balanced as possible. When you have a lack of balance, things get really out of hand really quickly. And I think that the best way to understand that is to have people that are very skilled at multiplayer, that are very passionate about it, and they're very focused on this mechanic, because that supports a esports system. That supports people wanting to climb ranks. It supports not just going to this meta approach where things are broken. I think that it's a hard thing to do, but I think you want to try to achieve this. The next thing is that I also think you want to have a varied meta, and maybe there's some sort of gameplay element that could support this. Maybe it's like randomly in a game, you force a certain character to be picked, and maybe that character is not meta, but because that certain character has to be picked by both sides, it adds a different composition, and then random stuff like that could happen. I mean, it doesn't have to be forcing a certain character or preventing a certain character from being picked. Maybe it's different, like a power up on the level or something like that, but something that adds variety to the meta where you don't just see the same 10 heroes in competitive esports matches. You know, one of the things that makes esports fun to watch is there's variety, and having a variety of characters that are used, having characters that add different gameplays, twists, and experiences makes the game fun to watch from an esports perspective. But I also think it gives longevity to the game, and it helps the people that are playing the game competitively or streamers. And I think that if the streamers are having more fun, if they want to play the game, that brings in more audience, and then it supports the multiplayer aspect, and then of course the brand overall. And like I said, you want to keep these streamers and competitive people in your game because they're giving longevity to the game, and a balanced game is very important. Now, I know that's really hard to pull off, but I think it's very important. And you need competent gamers to keep this in check. I mean, I think you need people that are obsessed about this. You need people obsessed about competition. You need passionate gamers at the end of the day. And this is true with the single player games as well. I mean, like if you're making a Winston game, you want someone that's passionate about Winston. I mean, you want someone with a Winston poster in their room, okay? You want someone that loves Winston, they're obsessed with the character, and they want to make the most amazing single player game ever, okay? They love the character, and they're not trying to change their identity. They just want to make something that's super fun and compelling. Same with Widowmaker, really understanding who Widowmaker is and making an awesome game. And I think that you need that also for the multiplayer experience. Someone that is designing the multiplayer experience, and then after work, they want to stay after there, eat pizza, drink beer, drink soda, playtest this game, have a blast with people, and really understand, okay, yeah, this character is not great. We need to adjust this. You want that passion. You want that energy. I know it's hard to achieve this, but I think with the multiplayer element, you want these things. And I think that you really need to lean into the competitive aspect. You need to lean into these experts that understand the game. I think that's very core to making the multiplayer experience. And I think it's hard to do, but I think it's quite essential. And so beyond the multiplayer, I think another aspect that can make Overwatch huge, this just massive cultural icon, is to have this multimedia aspect. But to have this multimedia aspect, you have to be successful with the video games themselves, whether that's creating single player games or an amazing Overwatch multiplayer experience. And like I said, this is going to take some time. I mean, there might need to be another iteration of Overwatch. Maybe it's an Overwatch X, Overwatch 0. And this basically can help to build the multimedia franchise. And I feel like if you ever run into this conflict where you feel like the story's kind of run into a hole and you can't get out of it, I think there's always a easy fix to this. You can just kind of start over. Tracer does some sort of crazy thing with time travel and it creates a time loop and you just start over, okay? And you rewrite some of the lore, you keep some of it the same, and then you adjust accordingly. But I think that the multimedia aspect, that this is where you get into this serious business of things. This is where you get into this cultural icon side of things, but you need to make awesome video games. You need to bring value to the customers. You need to make these characters amazing and just recognizable and loved by everyone with single player games. And of course, an awesome multiplayer experience, which I think you need to eventually move past Overwatch 2. You need to make like an Overwatch X, an Overwatch 3, something like that, a rebrand at some point. Doesn't have to be immediately, but probably need to rebrand multiplayer at some point. And like I said, when you create awesome single player gameplay experiences, or you create awesome multiplayer experiences, and then that funnels into all these other things. So, let's say you create a Widowmaker game, you could then have authors write Widowmaker books, and you have this whole franchise of Widowmaker lore that's being built, or Genji lore. And, there might be stuff that's out there right now, but I think you could really expand things. And then from there, you get into TV series. And some of the TV series or movies, I mean, these ideas write themselves. You have these animated movies, you can have different aesthetics to them. Some maybe are a little bit more darker or compelling stories. Some are a little bit lighter hearted. But once you kind of get into this TV series and movie side of things start getting huge and the money just starts probably rolling in. From there, you could have theme park rides at amusement parks. You could have branded products, just random products that have Overwatch characters on them. I mean, even more so than what might exist today. I'm not quite sure if there are. But ideally, if your product is wide, you have so many different ways to bring people into Overwatch. You have single player games, you have multiplayer experience, you possibly have books, you have movies, TV series, and all these things bring freshness to the product. You have so many different areas to explore. You have the lore around Widowmaker, you have the overarching Overwatch story, you have this multiplayer aspect. All these things where you kind of expand things out and you make the experience fun and approachable to so many different people. And then because you have this broadness to the Overwatch brand, it's working for you. You don't just have 10 years in between sequels for a video game. You have a TV series working for you. Then you have a single player game, and then the next multiplayer iteration of Overwatch. Then you have a book, and then things just get huge. It's kind of like Warhammer, but in my opinion, Overwatch is just a lot more approachable than some other video game series out there. I mean, Halo has massive potential, but Overwatch, in my opinion, is more mass appealable than Gears of War is, or Halo is. Not to say that those can't be big, but when you just think about the context of appealing to a wide variety of people, a wide variety of different gameplay interests from video games or TV series, Overwatch has massive potential. And like I said, this just expands into so many different things which eventually work for you, whether it's movies, TV series, books, video games. But like I said, to even get to this point, you have to build reputation of the video game. You have to invest in the product. You have to take risks. Not every video game that you make about Overwatch might not even be successful. You might try a Lucio game idea and it doesn't work out, but maybe the Widowmaker idea really works out for you. So I think you have to invest in it and you have to believe in the brand and you have to have really competent people to tell these stories and to understand what Overwatch is. I think that's very, very, very important. You have to have the right people. You have to have the right passion, the right strategy behind this. There's so much massive potential with this series, especially compared to other things out there. I mean, think about something like Mario or superhero movies or like something like Spider-Man. They have such longevity. I mean, they've been around for so long and they continue to bring value, whether it's in a movie or a video game, or Mario's just been relevant for decades. And other series, they've kind of lost their way a little bit. I mean, like Warcraft, I think has a little bit less relevance than it used to, or even Halo, and even maybe Star Wars to some extent, where you don't want to get into the situation where the people that love your series are on the older side and you don't have newer people getting into the franchise, because eventually your audience just kind of gets less and less, and then there's less money in it, and it's harder to kind of keep that series going. And so I think that when you expand it and you have video games coming out ever so often, right? It's not like these 7-year development cycles. You constantly have new products offering you. You can constantly get new people into the franchise, whether it's through movies or single player games or multiplayer games, right? Not every single player is going to play the Overwatch multiplayer, but they might play a Dishonored-like game with Genji. They might play a Lucio style game. They might play a tower defense game with Torbjorn. So I think that's very important, is to try to expand that net and invest in the series, because the ideas are so awesome. I mean, the core ideas are so great and you can take it in so many different directions. And that's why Overwatch has such mass potential. I mean, when you think about all the single player video games you can make, then take that and to make the multiplayer better, to expand into products that go beyond video games, the potential is massive. And it's not just the gains for the company itself in terms of making money, but it could bring amazing video game products to people. It could have amazing video games to play. You could have amazing TV series to watch. But to do that, you have to kind of fit some of these ideas that I talked about originally, which is ultimately a focus on long-term value creation for the customer. And I really wish that a lot of video game companies would think about this, to have that longer-term perspective and to realize what amazing potential they have with some of the franchises they have already. Not every single video game franchise might have the potential of Overwatch, but they have potential probably beyond what is being utilized today. And I really wish a lot of video game companies would realize that and try to focus on building something amazing for the long term. It shows us the huge potential of the video game industry. And so, nonetheless, Overwatch has massive potential. It has massive potential from a single player perspective, from a multiplayer perspective, and a multimedia perspective.